Approximately 334 days ago, on the Martian calendar, NASA began using the Perseverance Rover for an extended campaign of research on the Red Planet. Thanks to that rover, we've learned more about our distant neighbor this year than ever before. But not everything we've uncovered is a sort of discovery meant purely for the advancement of humanity. 2 microphones aboard the rover have been recording the winds of Mars for months, attempting to catalog the acoustic differences between our world and that barren one. Mars has an odd atmosphere compared to Earth, vastly different temperatures, densities, and chemical makeup, and these differences change 3 main things about sound. First, the speed of sound. The cold Martian air slows the travel of acoustic waves, with an average surface temperature near 81 degrees Fahrenheit, 63 degrees Celsius. The speed of sound there is lower, roughly 540 miles per hour, about 240 meters per second, rather than the roughly 760 miles per hour, 340 meters per second, we experience here. Up close you probably wouldn't notice, but over distance the difference becomes obvious. Imagine expecting the roar of a blaze and realizing, too late, that the house has already burned. Second, the volume. Mars's atmosphere is about 100 times less dense than Earth's. There's simply far less medium to carry sound. Sound waves attenuate much faster. Everything is quieter. You'd need to stand far closer to hear the same level of noise you'd hear on Earth. Third, the quality. The Martian atmosphere is mostly carbon dioxide, which absorbs high frequencies. High-pitched sounds are eaten away. Only low tones travel far. That effect, frequency-dependent attenuation, grows more noticeable with distance. Put these 3 together, and a soundscape on Mars becomes unfamiliar, delayed, subdued, and muffled of the highs. So imagine the shock when only a week ago, a shriek erupted across the recordings. I was at my station, half listening to the ambient tracks while I checked the microphones. I was almost dozing when a sudden, piercing, extremely high-pitched scream cut through the feed. I yanked the headphones off, heart pounding like it wanted out of my chest. After a minute to breathe, I gingerly put the cans back on. The scream was gone, but something lingered in the recording, a low, quivering hum that seemed to bleed from the spaces where the shriek had been. Ordinarily, we were told never to manipulate raw audio outside official channels. But the situation was unusual. I turned the volume down and slowed the playback to low frequency so my ears wouldn't be assaulted, because I thought hearing it more slowly might make it less terrifying. What played back then disturbed me in a way words struggle to hold. To try to explain, I'll offer a memory from my childhood. I had a dog named Brutus, a huge Labrador who took up more yard than most houses. He was fearless. Once, I swear, I saw him scare off a bear. He was loyal to a fault and always stayed by our side on hunts. One night, during a storm, I slipped into a muddy ditch. Brutus slid in after me and his leg became snagged by a thorny branch. He yelped, a sound that cut through the rain and lodged itself in my chest. We tried to free him. He panicked and only dug the thorns deeper. My brother ran home for rope. My father came with nothing that could lift the branch. The mud was a trap. My dog's cries echoed across the dusk as we left, helpless, and those yelps kept me awake for nights. When I heard the rover's audio, that memory came back, the same raw pain, the same frantic animal sound. I pulled up the rover's location metadata to see where the scream had originated. Near one of the broad craters we'd been studying for evidence of subsurface water. The metadata was still streaming in, and final compiles would come later, but I couldn't sleep. I began to gather every clip from that quadrant for the preceding week to see if more anomalies existed. Consecutive nights turned into a haze of red lights and headphone static. As I stitched clips together on my desktop, a pattern emerged. The shrieks were not isolated. They appeared intermittently across different timestamps, and they seemed to be moving. Mapping where the noises came from across the rover's path suggested something that, to my gut, felt impossible. The sound was tracking the rover. Could something be alive on Mars and following our vehicle? The question lodged beneath my ribs and wouldn't let go. The screams began to invade my sleep. In the spaces between shrieks, I could hear the planet in other ways, a low, thrumming vibration under the silence, like a distant drumskin being tapped. That night, I dreamed. In the dream, cities without architecture spread beneath crystalline ice, impossible geometries, and unrecognizable skylines, like early pulp science fiction. Something crashed on the surface. It had no form I could describe, an abomination of motion and noise that moved like a ripple, mimicking the cries of the planet's inhabitants and spreading that sound outward. The ground convulsed and swallowed whole neighborhoods, leaving behind only vibrations where buildings and people had been. In the dream, the Martians, if that is what they were, ran and screamed and were consumed by sheer resonance. I awoke, sweating, the memory of the scream somehow still skittering behind my teeth. I checked other rover recordings, Spirit, Opportunity, Curiosity, anything that could corroborate what I'd heard. There were traces, tiny blips, odd degradations in microbial assay logs. Figures that suggested something in the soil had reacted to the same time stomps as the audio bursts. When I re-examined photographs and cleaned video frames from that crater, there was nothing visible. No large organism, no shadow. Nothing I could point to and say, there. But the biology files were the strangest. Samples that initially showed microbial signatures in lab telemetry were being flagged as corrupted or erased in later logs. I replayed the microbial spectra and watched in disbelief. Each time a shriek coincided with a sampling, the signal would drop, bacterial signatures flattening into noise. The screams were not just sounds, they correlated with a vanishing. I shared my findings with my manager. I thought, reasonably, that a supervisor could help interpret anomalies and keep things contained. At first, she promised to review the data. The next morning, she brushed me off as if I'd dreamed the whole thing. That's already been processed and catalogued, she said, sharp. Focus on the other crater readings. But copies of the raw audio sat on my home drive. Files I hadn't deleted. When I tried to move them to a secure external archive for an independent reviewer, access permissions tightened overnight. Someone or something had locked them down. I felt watched. My friend Stephen and I traced the waveforms together. He tapped the spectrogram and said the obvious. The pitch is dropping. The wavelengths are lengthening. Whatever is producing this is approaching. That simple conclusion chilled me. If the pitch decreased as the source drew near, then the thing making them, if a thing it was getting closer to the rover every time we recorded. We tried other manipulations. We reversed audio files, stretched them, filtered them. Distortions appeared. Shrieks folded into low hums. Undercurrents that seemed to sync with sample retrieval events. One late evening, while we worked, Stephen's hair stood on end. It gets louder every time the rover takes a sample, he mouthed. The samples transmit something back here. Neither of us could say how. only that the correlation was uncanny. I begged my manager to take this seriously. She listened and then changed. Her eyes went vacant and, for the first time, her voice carried an otherworldly intonation. "What the planet offers is beyond anything you can imagine," she said softly. "Terraforming on a scale we can only dream of. Death is only a transition. Life is meant to feed what comes next." Behind her words there was a low thrum like wind moving through a mouth, and I felt a pressure in my temples as if sound were pressing at the inside of my skull. I called Stephen. No answer. I drove to his apartment in a panic. When I knocked, silence. I forced a window and crawled inside. The noise met me in a physical way, a piercing, cyclic howl that made me want to crawl into myself and disappear. In his living room, I found Stephen on the floor, his injuries horrific and the scene is something my mind now edits and softens. I cannot and will not recreate every detail here. His final typed message on a cracked screen read only 2 words. "They are listening." I almost followed him. For a moment, the blade in my hand felt warm with inevitability. Something in the air, or in my head, urged surrender. I slammed the blade down and ran. I don't know how I got home. I parked on my street and sat in the dark until dawn, like a small animal cowering from a storm. When my manager called later, I let it roll to voicemail. Her recorded message was warped by the same shriek, a thinning, mechanical howl that made my mouth taste of metal. I tried once more to bring the evidence forward. Instead, I was told to clear my desk. "There's evidence you attempted unauthorized transfers," they said in a voice that had all the softness of a locked door. "You're lucky to keep your job." I left, but not empty-handed. That night, I wrote a small, quiet program, a backdoor, and slipped it into the network. If nobody else would let the recordings out, I'd keep watching. We attempted to salvage data offline. Most of the files had been corrupted beyond easy repair. The audio files that remained intact were the most chilling. The shriek, the hum, the correlating microbial disappearance. Stephen theorized something we hadn't wanted to consider. The sound itself may be hazardous, not simply a symptom, but an agent. When it sounded, microbes degraded. Signatures vanished. Whatever we had recorded might be an active predator of life, or a carrier of some transmissible effect that unstitched biology where it touched. My nightmares intensified. I dreamed of a lush, once green Mars being boiled down into the red dust we now know, of civilizations turned into echoes, their final moments mimicked and amplified and then devoured by some invisible frequency. I dreamed the planet itself had been infected, not with a bacterium, but with a resonant weapon that crawled through In the dream, the ground tore my boots off and pulled me into crimson soil. I choked on grit and woke vomiting dust that felt like Mars caked under my nails. When I tried to confront authorities, I was reassigned. "You've been spreading unverified claims," they said. "You must step away." Their tone was clinical. Their eyes were not. They watched for a moment too long. I was escorted out, but I had a copy of one file. I buried it on an old drive and took it home. Stephen called the night before he died and whispered, "If you hear it, don't listen. If you listen, you'll want to join them." I thought he meant something metaphorical. I was wrong. Now I'm posting this because the silence grows thin and because the pattern is accelerating. Every transmission we get from that area of Mars shows more frequent screams, and more corrupted biosignatures. The pitch falls in the recordings as if the thing is coming closer. And my manager, she sounds different now when she talks about the samples, as if those samples are not for study but for delivery. They'll find their way here one day, she said in that hollow voice. Everything returns. I don't know whether to believe what I found, and I am terrified to be right. If a sound can unmake microbes, what could it do to us? If it can compel self-destruction, can it be transmitted through speakers, through radio, through memory itself? So here is what I know. The recordings exist. They are being suppressed. And when the shriek plays, something dies. I don't know if this is a natural phenomenon, an extraterrestrial pathogen, or some artifact of a broken world trying to speak. But I know the feeling the noise leaves behind. It's like having the marrow of your bones rattled. It whispers decay. If you hear anything like it, slow the playback, mute the high bands, don't let it play unfiltered. Archive everything off-site. Tell someone you trust and don't let them tell you it's nothing. That is what my friend told me in his last lucid moments. They are listening. He was right. They are. Good evening once again, kids. It's me, Mr. Creepypasta. Thanks for sticking through tonight's episode, whether you listened, watched, or scrolled. If you liked this series, The Neverglade Mysteries, my tiny town has just been put on lockdown. Tales from the Gas Station, remember, there are novels and audiobooks available on Amazon, some narrated by yours truly. A huge thank you to all my patrons over at Patreon. You keep strange stories alive and allow me to produce exclusive tales you can't get anywhere else. I appreciate every single one of you, and I mean that. If this episode kept you up tonight, good. That's my job. And if it didn't, maybe you weren't listening close enough. Sweet dreams, but sleep with one eye open.